Well, the great Rush Limbaugh used to impress upon his audience that for efficiency's sake, don't go on, just say ditto. And so I can really cut this very short. What the great Karen Sigeman has just done is say most of what needs to be said about just about everything I can think of. So could we just have a round of applause for Karen Sigeman? Karen is, as you know, and some of you have escaped, actually, deep behind enemy lines. And what she is doing with this organization, the American Freedom Alliance, is nothing less than extraordinary. And I want to thank especially sponsors. I think I see envelopes here that would encourage you and enable you to facilitate supporting the American Freedom Alliance, which I cannot impress upon you enough is really important. These programs, and she's enumerated what we've been doing with them, so I won't belabor that point, I think are intended to do two things. One is, well, to bring this remarkable team of experts together and make them accessible to folks like yourselves. And through the miracle of John's handiwork, videotape, countless others besides. They're also intended to try to move the conversation beyond admiring problems, as we say in Washington, to figuring out what do we do about them. As she said, at a minimum, to try to keep it from getting worse. But what about, making America America again? That's not just keeping it from getting worse, that's restoring our country, which we have been privileged to have bequeathed to us in a very different shape than we are poised to turn it over to our generations and progeny. So, as she said, buckle up, because I'm going to talk to you about the war. Are we on agreement? I mean, just level setting. Anybody here think we are not in a war? No hands. Anybody think it's an exaggeration to say it is a world war? No? No hands. Well, again, I can keep this short. We're right together. No, we're not really, because I want to suggest to you what I call my unified field theory of what is this war about? It is. But at whose hands? And I'm going to argue, and Karen and I have gone back and forth about this. I actually got it branded on a couple of these things, but she removed it. And now we're back to Bannon. I call it not World War III, I call it World War Xi. Because I believe that guy and the Communist Party that he runs and the ambitions that he personally has expressed, and that the 90 million plus or minus, in fact, in one of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinars, it turns out it's a little less than 90 million because apparently 2.9 million members of the Chinese Communist Party are currently missing. Yeah. They most certainly are at risk of missing organs too. You're right. We'll talk more about what that means for a guy like Xi Jinping. But let me just posit the proposition that what it means for us is that we're facing an unprecedented level of evil and danger, because there has been no more evil institution in the history of the world than the Chinese Communist Party. We'll, throughout the course of the day, in honor of Rush Limbaugh, shorten that to CCP, so don't be confused if that's what you hear. But the Chinese Communist Party, under successive malevolent forces, starting with Mao Zedong, has demonstrated just how evil it is, if any evidence were required, by murdering, by some estimates, 100 million of its own people. And by the way, for those keeping count, that doesn't include the 400 million that the CCP boasts of having murdered in the womb. Some of our experts on the subject say that's actually lowballing it. It may be 500 million. But the point, ladies and gentlemen, is not simply that this is an unspeakable horror, unprecedented in its scale. I mean, you can literally put the Nazis and Pol Pot and assorted other lesser communists, and even Joe Stalin and his friends, all together, and you still don't get 100 million people. And my point to you is, if you think about it, is there any chance that a regime that would do that to, again, its own, will treat us better if they can get their hands on us? And of course the answer to that is no. And that's what makes this conversation so urgently important, because they are perilously close to getting their hands on us. And we'll talk a bit about what they're up to elsewhere. But I want to make a special point of impressing upon you what they're doing here and with whom they're doing it. I have to confess that for some of you who were promised this book, you're not going to get it today because I didn't bring him. I got to tell you, I was schlepping them around in Florida this past weekend, and I kind of got tired of it. So we owe you. It's called The Indictment. And I'm not talking about some of the other ones that you've been hearing a lot about, particularly Donald Trump's, 900 years worth of felony offenses he's been charged with? Whatever. I'm talking about the indictment of the Chinese Communist Party and friends for crimes against America, China, and the world. This book is only partly a product of the work of myself and my co-author, Didi Laugesen, who's the executive secretary of our Committee on the Present Danger of China. It's mostly the result of the contributions that our great chairman, Brian Kennedy, and Trevor Loudon, and John Mills, and numerous others who are not with us. I'm not sure whether I'm missing anybody else. Karen Sigeman, of course. The contributions they've made to a body of work that some of you have gratified me enormously by saying you've actually watched. Hallelujah. We've been doing basically weekly or thereabouts a series of webinars under the banner of the Committee on the Present Danger of China for the purpose of trying to flesh out the case, basically, of this criminal conduct. The case of the efforts the Chinese have made, as Karen mentioned, in preempting my speech, of unrestricted warfare against our country. Trying to help you understand the myriad ways in which this has been going on for decades. And most of us are unaware that we're even at war with the Chinese Communist Party, let alone the progress they've made through these unrestricted warfare techniques, which basically means everything they can think of they can do to us, to this point short of full-on explosive kinetic warfare. It's financial warfare, economic warfare, it's political warfare, it's sabotage, it's subversion, it's brainwashing, it's demoralization. It's poisoning us with fentanyl, and then there's that nasty bit of business about a biological warfare attack. And don't you know that in this book that they actually published, obviously with the permission of the Chinese Communist Party, in 1999, they enumerated all of those lines of attack, including biological warfare. In the intelligence business, this is what is known, it's a technical term, as a clue. When they tell you exactly what it is they're going to do, and then they do it, what does it make us when we have either ignored it or simply failed to recognize the peril? Now, just to give you some examples of what that has translated into. Sandra, how am I doing on time here? 19 minutes. Okay, we got a lot of exposure here, but very quickly. The Chinese Communist Party has, from its inception, had as its ambition world domination. I think it's its rightful place, that China was, after all, the Middle Kingdom. It was the center of the universe, that the emperors, prior to the Chinese communists, but under their rule too, should rule all under heaven. And as Karen mentioned, again, in stealing my line, this was an objective that could only be achieved if the impediment to it was somehow removed, namely us. And yes, there are others that are not entirely on board with this program, but more or less could be dispensed with. They could be bought off, or they could be conquered. And the Chinese have been busily doing just that around the world. In fact, we did a study, the committee, I guess about 2 years ago now, of something called the Belt and Road Initiative. I don't know how familiar you are with this term. It's a Xi Jinping coined phrase. And when we did this analysis, I have to tell you, even I, who am trying to pay attention to this stuff, was astonished to discover that 147 countries around the world were now part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And that was 2 years ago. I'm sure that more have signed up since. And what does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? It means that they are basically part of a colonial empire that the Chinese have been busily putting into place, using inducements like, well, just cash, corruption, but also the possibility that if you simply participate in payday loans, you will be able to get, with Chinese financing, ports and airfields and rail networks and roadways and exploiting your natural resources and all kinds of good stuff. Until you can't make payments on those loans. At which point, the Chinese Communist Party gets to foreclose on all of that good stuff. And all of it, by the way, has been designed for dual use, for the civilian purposes, at least nominally the interests of the people whose countries they're being built in, but always with the idea that they would be available to the People's Liberation Army for its use in projecting power, both in the country in question and usually in other areas that are typically strategically interesting. So there's just one example of something that's been going on under our noses and that is changing the character of the world. You hear a lot about BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now it's been extended by some 40 or so other countries. Well, that's a subset of this larger empire, but it's also being put together for the purposes, again, of undermining us, undermining most notably our dollar as the reserve currency of the world. And those of you who've been listening to Steve Bannon might have heard once every couple of minutes about the end of the dollar, right? The dollar empire. Did you happen to know that you could get a free copy of his book? I know you know. Anyway, the point is that the dollar, if it goes away as the reserve currency of the world, is going to cause us perilous economic and almost certainly physical as well as political circumstances. And the Chinese Communist Party is beavering away to accomplish that end state, with, again, help from their friends. They have, amidst all of this, of course, busily been building up the option they had lacked back in 1999, which is to use military force, the old-fashioned kind of warfare, the shooting kind of warfare, to take down the impediment to their ambitions. But don't you know that thanks to you, probably unknowingly, but thanks to you, thanks to the investments you've been making in pension funds, in 401k plans, in mutual funds, in exchange-traded funds, and any number of other kinds of investment vehicles, you have made possible everything I've just talked about, including the buildup of its military power, to the point where it is now a peer competitor. By some estimates, in certain categories of weapons, at the very least, are superior. Giving Xi Jinping an option to do what he couldn't do, or his predecessors couldn't do before. In fact, it's very interesting that this is a subject for a longer conversation, but maybe we could develop it in Q&A later. But one of the things that one of his predecessors did, a cuddly little fellow by the name of Deng Xiaoping. I used to work for a wonderful United States senator by the name of Scoop Jackson. They don't make Democrats like Scoop Jackson anymore, folks. But Scoop Jackson loved Deng Xiaoping. Before he passed, he was a frequent visitor to China, and he thought Deng hung the moon. Deng also, well, I won't say hung, but shot people in Tiananmen Square. He was a ruthless SOB. And his plan for transforming China was a strategy that they called hide and bide. You got to love these branding terms, don't you? Belt and Road. Hide and bide. Hide and bide was about hiding from the West the fact that they had absolutely no interest in becoming like us, you know, good international citizens and friendly competitors, business and so on. No, they wanted to destroy us. But they were going to bide their time and put on this false face and receive the money, both direct financial investment and technology transfers and other kinds of, well, life support for the regime from the West, and particularly the United States of America. And the point of all that, folks, is that the cumulative effect of all this has indeed, as Barack Obama would say, fundamentally transformed China. Now, there's still a lot of people in China who are having a very rough go of it. We had a webinar this week. Brian was one of our participants in it. And I think I failed to mention Trevor Loudon in my comment, great members of our committee. And we'll come to him in just a second. We'll come to him shortly in the program too, but I'll give you just an intro as Karen did me. What we have here is a program that has brought about a plan, I think it's fair to say, that when you combine it with what the Chinese have done inside the United States, has not only fundamentally transformed China, it's fundamentally transformed our country. And let me just give you one example. Trevor will talk a lot about all of this, I'm sure. The extent to which particularly our young people have been indoctrinated to believe that the Chinese have a superior model politically and in terms of their economic system. It's more fair, it's more just, socially just, and all that. Well, one of the great, truly brilliant instruments for bringing that about, of course, is a tech platform known as TikTok. And probably everybody you know, at least everybody, under 30 and maybe a few of you, Donald Trump, are using TikTok. But not like they're being used by TikTok. How are they being used? Well, for one thing, their data is being collected, which enables them to be exploited or manipulated or otherwise subverted. But another is that they're being fed a stream of information. Not just what the algorithm tells the Chinese you like, which makes it unbelievably addictive, but also what they want you to know, what they want you to think, what they want you to believe. And look no further, folks, for how this works in practice than what has been going on of late with the young people of America becoming zealots for Hamas. It just so happens that, for example, this isn't Hamas, but it's part of what I call the Sharia supremacist team. There was a thing recently, as you may know, a trending thing. A letter that Osama bin Laden wrote, basically condemning us and extolling the virtues of, Sharia and Islam and his shtick. Well, it turns out, folks, on closer inspection, it didn't really trend anywhere except on TikTok. Not on Twitter, not on Facebook, not on Instagram, but TikTok. Well, was that an accident, comrade? As the communists say? No, of course not. But it's an example of how this works. They are inside not just our wire, they are inside our heads. And this greatly compounds the problem that Karen talked about, which is a failure to understand the nature of the enemy that we're up against, let alone to recognize the magnitude of the danger it poses to us, to say nothing of what we need to do about it. So, I want to close out this piece of the problem with just one other example that I personally am frantic about. And I think particularly people living in this state know about this, and everybody else better. Across the open border, not so far from here, are essentially open borders. And across those open borders have been coming not only untold millions of people, some of whom are seeking a better life and all that, but some of whom are seeking the end of ours. And I put right at the top of the list, and I'm no slouch when it comes to warning about Sharia supremacists and jihadis. And again, what we've just seen, Karen was talking about, what an eventful month this has been. The couple of characters that were killed by the Israelis in the past few days have reminded us of the blood they had on their hands that were from Americans. Marines in the barrack and the embassy in Lebanon. And I think the guy that was whacked in Tehran had 17 Americans' blood on his hands. So these are bad folks. Don't get me wrong, but the guys that, again, consistent with my unified field theory, I'm particularly concerned about are what are reputedly divisions worth of People's Liberation Army personnel who've come across that southern border, some across the northern one as well. And what does that mean? That means that we have in place today, especially if they team up with the jihadis, with whom they are working, by the way, an army inside America. And just for purposes of calibration, do you remember what 19 guys did to us? And those were amateurs, basically. We're talking about professionals, and we're talking about them here in force. We're talking about them here with marching orders from the Chinese Communist Party. So I'm going to conclude this part by just simply saying everything Karen said about the magnitude of the challenge we're facing is absolutely true. And look, I hope I'm wrong that the Chinese Communist Party is behind most of it. Look, I hope I'm wrong about all of this, honestly. It's a lot better for the country. But if any of it's right, if any of the work that we've been doing with our Committee on the Present Danger of China to showcase it and to try to make it accessible to folks like yourselves, why we're doing this roadshow in swing states like this one, if any of it's right, we have got to be mobilizing to do what we can. So what would that look like? What does it take for us to do what we can? Well, first of all, doing what you're doing. Understanding this threat, learning about it, becoming authoritative in your own right about it, so that you can help others in your respective circles of influence, in turn, learn about it, and therefore be equipped to do something as well. We make a big point in this book, right in the subtitle, as I have with you today, to talk about not just the Chinese Communist Party, but its friends who are enablers of so much of this. Wall Street is my particular bête noire, but I have to say that in every field of endeavor, in every aspect of our society, in every profession, from the business world to academia, to Hollywood, to politics, we have Chinese friends who are now operating on their behalf and to our great detriment. I believe we need, and the term the indictment is used here advisedly, because at the very minimum, we need to prosecute them in the court of public opinion, if not in a legal court. My preference is the latter. I just want to add two other points. Coming back to the bit about Wall Street, we must stop underwriting the enemy. This is, again, a technical term, a no-brainer. And if you haven't seen it, I really commend to you a tremendous program that Maria Bartiromo did, a special It was originally aired on Fox Nation behind a paywall, so if you're not a subscriber, you wouldn't maybe have seen it there, but it was on Fox Business as well, twice a week or so ago. Check it out. It will really equip you to understand the importance of this particular effort. There are 9 different bills in Congress aimed at trying to make it illegal to underwrite the Chinese Communist Party in various ways. We need to get behind those as well. I'll close with just this. We're here to help you help our country. What is taking place for the next 4 months, as you know, is going to shape the future of this country, and it is going to, I think, give you a special window of opportunity to make a difference in the ways that I've just identified, and you'll be hearing a lot more from my colleagues. We need you to become engaged politically. I'm not telling you how to do that. Brian Kennedy will. I'm telling you, you need to be part of the solution here. And if you are, and if you'll do one last thing, and I'm over time, pray to God for his help in what is fundamentally a spiritual war. Thank you all. God bless you.